small nonprofit especially, are just under so much pressure to continuously deliver services. So sometimes they're like, okay, well, we have this huge need from our community. We kind of just have to try to fill it somehow. So we're going to put this crazy thing into the budget and go on a hope and a prayer and, wish that we can actually make these fundraising goals. But if it's not realistic, you're doing a disservice not just to your fundraising team, but to the community that you serve as well, because they deserve more than like hopes and dreams and wishes about the services that they're relying on. Like they need to actually be able to rely on the services and have an organization that's going to deliver on the promises that it set.
Hi, friends. Ever wondered how you could turn your big ideas into results? Together, let's reimagine a better sector, tackle systemic issues, and yes, raise some serious cash. Welcome back to The Small Nonprofit, the podcast where your passion meets action. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Small Nonprofit Podcast. I'm your host, Maria Rio, and I'm here with your co-host,
Caitlin McBride. So nice to be here.
Hi, Caitlin. Okay, so I'm super excited about today's topic because so many of our clients come to us with this issue. And when we get there, it's usually already too late to help them with it. And they're midway through their fiscal year.
I am so excited to dive into this. I have been in this situation so many times as a fundraiser where these very unrealistic fundraising goals have been set. And it's the worst feeling because it makes you feel like you're just being set up for failure. And I've found it so many times where even if I've like grown revenue, I can't even really celebrate that because I'm still never getting there because they're like, you need to increase revenue by 40% from last year, like overall organizational revenue. So even if we do 25%, which is amazing, you don't get to celebrate it because it's this unattainable goal that's been set. So,
I had a client who they had set their overall budget to increase year over year by 40%. And when I was working on their fundraising plan, I was saying, look, that's not realistic. Like, you don't even have a very sustainable fundraising program. And if you did, the increase would be like 4 to 10%, right? Now that you'll have additional support in the form of a fractional fundraiser, like maybe we can push that, which is great. But something like 40% is usually not very doable. It's usually an outlier year. So, we actually increased our revenue by 30%, but it was a lot of work from everyone across the organization. It was a really well-oiled machine. But even then, exactly what you're saying, like you don't really get to feel like you can celebrate, even though it's an incredible feat of fundraising, like, you still feel, oh, I didn't hit that ridiculous budget. So how am I celebrating? Right? Because people might still have to, lose their jobs or anything like that because the budget was the problem from the beginning.
totally. And I agree. And I think the small nonprofit, especially, are just under so much pressure to continuously deliver services. So sometimes they're like, okay, well, we have this huge need from our community. We kind of just have to try to fill it somehow. So we're going to put this crazy thing into the budget and go on a hope and a prayer and, wish that we can actually make these fundraising goals. But if it's not realistic, you're doing a disservice not just to your fundraising team, but to the community that you serve as well, because they deserve more than like hopes and dreams and wishes about the services that they're relying on. Like they need to actually be able to rely on the services and have an organization that's going to deliver on the promises that it set.
I want to dive a little bit into why these random goals exist that are picked out of thin air. Like, how does this happen, right? So for me, the times that I've seen it happen has been like maybe they had an outlier year the year before. So for example, Roe v. Wade really impacted one of our clients' revenue for that one year. And then they base their next year's budget on that, right? So that's one thing. Like you had an outlier year and you base your budget on that. The other one that I've seen is, boards are out to lunch. They have no idea what's going on. They're approving a budget they don't understand. So that's another issue. Or one that I've experienced also has been like, hey, this is a ridiculous goal. You really need to tone it down, and then being ignored by the board. I wonder what other scenarios that you've seen.
I think you've covered a lot there. I remember coming into one organization where they had done all the budgeting and strategic planning like a month or so before I started. So they knew that a fundraiser was coming on and they didn't like hold tight for a second just to see if maybe I had something to say about it. And basically presented me with this plan, which was, and I'm gonna like air quotes for this as like a plan, because was not. It was really just like a statement that just says we are going to double revenue, like period, end of sentence. And was like, can you agree to this as your goal? I'm like, no, I cannot. That's not going to happen. They had a big legacy gift come in. So similar to what you were saying of like they had a big outlier year and we're kind of basing like that budget, like that revenue for the next year's budget when like they had never had this happen before and like didn't even have a legacy program. It was just a random thing that came in and was just game changing for them. So it was a lot of ambition, a lot of hope, a lot of dreams. So yes, we did not achieve that goal.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what is a realistic goal. Don't worry, Caitlin and I did the research for you. We already knew, but we wanted to bring you some hard numbers. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is a good year over year goal right now. So let's say you have an organization that has an established fundraising program, right? Like you've been raising X amount year over year. Let's say 100,000 year over year. A good conservative goal would be 5 to 10%. So that means that you're maintaining your current operations without major changes, right? So your programming is staying the same. You're not having like a huge increase in salary. You're not having a huge increase in service users. You're kind of doing the status quo. So you can expect a 5 to 10% increase in fundraising. And that's if you have, people in place to run the fundraising and the stewardship and grow your revenue.
Next is if you are aiming for some moderate growth. So this is where, you might be bringing in maybe some new hires, some new initiatives, some other donor engagement strategies. So this is where you should be aiming for 10 to 15%, with 10 being kind of the reasonable baseline goal for most organizations. So that is if you are, yeah, bringing in new initiatives and trying some new things. Still, just 10 to 15%. That is your goal.
And I would say like anything above that, anything above 15%, you're starting to get into really like red flag, super ambitious territory, which
Mm.
is possible. As I said earlier, we hit 30% increase year over year, but you really need to have a big investment in your strategy and in your staff, right? So if you're bringing in a new person and you're giving them zero budget to do new fundraising initiatives, their hands are still going to be tied, right? But if you're giving this new person the ability to spend, $50,000 on the fundraising portfolio, they're going to be able to do a lot more with that. So over 15, I would say proceed with caution, really have a plan around that. If you're putting like 25%, 30%, and you don't have a plan, you know that you're going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, definitely agree. And also just want to add that, if you are seeing this growth and you are, doing this like ambitious growth and it's working, understanding that growth to the fundraising portfolio also means growth to your fundraiser's work plate. So if, your fundraiser is absolutely knocking it out of the park and they increase revenue by 40% year on year, that means their work has grown by 40% from the previous year. Because none of that revenue, unless, you've gotten multi-year government grants that feels totally secure and you're not in an election year, then all of that revenue has to be worked for to continue. So understanding that they need that support to continue that growth and to continue even just managing the portfolio that they've grown.
You know what's so funny? When you were saying that, I'm thinking like, do people see us as like passive income? Buy one fundraiser and now it's passive income. Like nothing about their work will change if we get more money. And definitely, like I've had like major gift officers who reported to me, and they had a portfolio of like 200 people, which is already quite large, right? 200 individual relationships. And we're crushing it. So there's more and more major gifts coming in. And I could see the struggle that was happening. And how do I continue to have these like very deep, meaningful, personal relationships with people who are giving like more than $5,000 to this organization while managing, my current workload and these new people and trying to grow the portfolio with like the current donors, but also those new donors.
It is work and it's so much work. And even if you are focusing not on like donor acquisition, if you're focusing on donor retention and really like deepening those relationships, like that's still increasing your workload of like increasing those donor touch points and increasing those tours or phone calls, whatever you might be doing. So yeah, I think it's just so important to understand that it's not, as you said, it's not passive income. Like that's continual work. I had an experience where we had growth of it was like few, it was overall, it was 130% within 2 years. That meant that my workload had grown 130% within 2 years. And they came to me again and were like, okay, so we're going to increase revenue by 40%, overall revenue by 40% for the next year. And I just completely burned out. And that's how they ended up losing me as a staff member.
And something that I want to say in this piece, because, we want to set smart goals, we want to set realistic goals, is your outlier years, where that money is coming from, will make a big difference if you can retain it the next year, right? So, with the example that you gave earlier of a planned gift, like, oh, $1 million planned gift, that might not happen every year. Use your common sense. But but if it's like we had this huge influx of COVID donors, we had 3,000 more people give this year than ever before. You might be able to retain like a good 1,500, maybe 2,000 if you do a really good job there. And that is more of a sustainable source of revenue than a planned gift, right? Doing that digging deeper into your budget of where the money came from that caused an outlier year might also help set better targets for next year.
Yes, definitely understanding that data and understand, yeah, what it is like what is likely to return. I had one organization that I walked into where they put every single grant that they were applying to in their budget. So if you think you're going to have a 100% success rate in every single grant, oh, I hate to break it to you.
I also hate when I've had conversations with board members around exactly what you're talking about. It's just very like, okay, well, give me a percentage rate for the whole portfolio, right? So it's like, okay, the portfolio is 1.2 million, 1.4 million, whatever it is. So give me a percentage rate of how much of that is going to come in again. And I'm like, these are individual relationships that I have with each person. So each one will have a different like possibility that I'm giving. So I can't give it to you for the whole portfolio. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and I think it is important to remember that, budgets are kind of a bit of a guessing game, but you just have to do your absolute best with the knowledge that you have in that moment when you're creating that budget and also continually come back to it too. Like it's not a crock pot, okay? This is like you have to keep looking back at it. Like I've introduced things like variance reporting. So every month you go back and check, like, okay, did we actually make this budget? Like how far are we off? And that really helps you to look at for next year, creating a budget that's going to be closer to reality because it's never going to be exactly what you think it is. Essentially, like none of us have a crystal ball, but understanding that like, okay, we were way off here, we were really close here, we actually like did much better than we thought here, and understanding that as you go along in the year is crucial because that also lets you make decisions about spending. Because if you're don't understand that the budget is way off and you're halfway through the year or three-quarters of the way through the year, like you might not be able to deliver the services that you said you were going to and that people are really relying on. And that is heartbreaking. And there are some really tough decisions that have to be made at that point.
I love what you're saying because I feel like most of the time when we budget, we always add an increase, never a decrease, no matter what. Right? Like the organization's on fire, the ED left, like the board all resigned, still 10% increase. Like makes no sense.
The optimism in nonprofits sometimes is, it's hopeful, it's nice, but it's not always grounded in it's not always grounded in reality, and I don't think that people understand enough the impact that it has for the staff and for the people who are relying on the services of the nonprofit. If you wake up and you're handed a completely unrealistic target at your job year after year after year, like how is that going to make you feel?
And I think, that really speaks to kind of the lack of retention with fundraisers specifically, but across the sector. But okay, we talked about the problem. We kind of talked about what are these realistic goals. I want our listeners to kind of also get away from the conversation, how they can set their own goals. So, what are the factors that they should be considering? We talked a little bit about outlier years, but what are some other ones?
Yeah, so I think factoring in those outlier years, as you said, factoring in like when you're talking about like let's say grant fundraising for instance, like factoring in the probability of those grants, like maybe you have developed a really, really good relationship with a funder, and maybe it's a new grant, but you're feeling really, really good about it, and like that kind of thing, like you can take into consideration when you're making your budget. But if it is something, I say for me, I don't put anything into a budget unless I'm like 75 to 80% sure. So I think looking at, yeah, the relationships that you built, probability of things coming in, looking at, as I said, past year performance, like how close you were to last year's budget, and all the initiatives as well that you're putting in place for the year. If there is something new that you're trying, maybe you do want to have a bit of a goal towards that, but also making it realistic. We seem to err to the side of like extreme optimism, which is nice. But I think we need to get back to like being a bit more conservative and just, yeah, making sure that what we're doing is realistic. If we end up crushing it for whatever reason and really exceeding our goals, great, celebrate that. And then take a really data driven approach to looking at your goals for the next year. What about you? Any other considerations when you've been doing fundraising budgets? Also, I feel like we are giving all of these things as if fundraisers are in the room when they're making fundraising budgets, which I know sometimes they aren't. So hopefully, if you can get in the room, this is some things that you can put in.
But if you can't, you can send them this episode. Okay, so things that I would also urge people to consider is so looking at year over year data across your portfolios and like seeing the change there. So if it's going up, down, breaking it out as much as you can. So grants, are they corporate? Are they family foundations? Individual giving, is it small gifts, mid-level, major, planned giving? Like what is it? So really breaking it down. And if you're seeing like year over year, you're hitting 10% increase, great. Aim for 12 to 15. You could definitely do it, right? But if you're hitting, 2% increase, don't aim for 12 to 15 without some significant investment. The other thing that I would want people to consider is the capacity that they have available. So if you're increasing your goal, maybe it's you're trying to build a cultural philanthropy across your organization, more people are going to be involved. Awesome. And then two more things. One is the type of organization. Some organizations aren't going to be a hot topic or have a lot to report year over year, right? So, for example, like a disaster relief organization that supports like flooding, right? If there hasn't been a flood in the past 2 years, you can't really fundraise around, we're always here. Like it just makes it harder, right? So, really thinking about the type of organization and the positionality in regard to like current events is really, really important. And my last thing to consider when setting a goal is current events, right? So we have the government that's doing a lot of interesting things, a lot of things that we probably don't want to get into right now. But like inflation is also really impacting giving, right? We're seeing a lot of interesting trends in giving where smaller donors under 100 are actually kind of dropping off more and more as inflation hits them. And that's over 50% of donors, right? So your smaller donors are more impacted, which means that you're more reliant on your larger donors, right? So understanding that there's like trends outside of your organization that will greatly impact what you're doing. For example, one time I had my database go down on Giving Tuesday, know? So there are things that you need to think about, and there's a lot of factors to consider, but we want you to have as much information to set realistic goals that you can hit, exceed, feel proud about, and you feel like you know how they actually came to be instead of like a random number picked out of thin air.
Oh my God, the panic that you just instilled in me with your database going down on Giving Tuesday. I have another one where my website was hacked during end of year campaign. Ooh, panic. But okay, I have a question for you because I think that this is something that I'd love to just hear like how you would frame this. 'Cause I think this is something that probably comes up with for a lot of other fundraisers and people who work in nonprofits where, they're like, this is how much we think that we can raise. And then you kind of hear from board leadership, whoever, being like, okay, but like we need to deliver these services to our community. And I know that the cost of this exceeds what you think you can raise, but our community needs this. So like we got to make it happen. What what would you say to that? What would be your response?
Well, I think in a lot of scenarios, like as the fundraiser or director of development, ED, you feel like most responsible for the gift, right? So it feels like the board is trying to put pressure on you, but are they doing anything to contribute to that goal that they are setting? Or are they just saying, like, no, it's your fault, your business if everything goes upside down, right? Which feels kind of unfair, right? And I think that's why people end up leaving. So for me, like, I'm very comfortable speaking my mind. I would say, look, realistic is 4 to 10. And that's if you have a, solid fundraising program, which in house, like I always did, but just like that is a trend. Fundraising isn't magic. It's consistency, it's stewardship, it's building relationships, building trust. Like that doesn't happen overnight. And for someone who's thinking like, "No, yes it does." Like then you don't understand fundraising.
Yeah, it's not an ATM. It is slow and steady, and that's how you build sustainable long-term relationships and sustainable growth that you can rely on year after year and not just have these outlier years and then a big drop the next year, which impacts your services. Yeah. I ask because I've been in that situation where I've been like, well, you got to make this happen. And I, similarly had enough experience and confidence in my ability to push back and be like, this is what I feel confident in, not that. And then I got the response, oh, well, the board will help you raise it. Spoiler, they did not. Okay,
Every time that I've heard that, they've never helped me raise it.
never, never.
And I've been fundraising for like 14 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you hear the board will help you raise it, that, yeah.
Liar. Liar, liar. Okay. I want to talk about one more thing before we close off this episode, but I want to talk about the idea of leading versus lagging indicators. So, here is something that I want you to take back to your board, take back to your ED every time that they're like, you need to raise $1 million overnight, right? So, your dollars raised is a lagging indicator. It is the result of all the work that you've already done. Right? So, I wonder if you can actually help them see leading indicators. So, a leading indicator would be like how many emails we've collected, right? How many meetings we've had, how many appeals have we done, right? So, the things that are in your control are your leading indicators, and the things that are not so much in your control, but are a result of the work that you put in is a lagging indicator. So, sometimes thinking about it that way actually helps you break down the goal into very measurable steps that you can share as like being realistic or unrealistic. If your leading indicator is I had to have 3 major donor calls every week, is that realistic for your organization? Maybe, maybe not. So just thinking about it in actionable terms can actually help you set better SMART goals for your organization.
I think that's so great. And I think too often the only measurable that we use in fundraising is money and the money that's come in. But we don't actually understand that the money that's coming in right now is the result of 2 years of cultivation and work and relationship building. And I always say this when I'm talking about things like end of year campaigns. Like we had someone recently who was like, we're just going to try an end of year campaign and see how it goes. Okay, the end of year campaign, you can write the most beautiful campaign and the most beautiful messages that anyone has ever seen. What the end of year campaign is actually a reflection of all the stewardship and the cultivation and the work that you've put in throughout the rest of the year and seeing that reflected back at you. So you can, write the most beautiful prose ever, but if you haven't talked to any of your donors up until making this ask in December, it's not going to go very well. And that I'm love that you're talking about that in that like that is It's not just what's happening right now, it's the buildup of all the work that's been happening before. And there's different indicators that you can use to measure that.
Well, we hope that you have taken a lot out of this conversation. It's one that Caitlin and I have often with each other and with our clients because, it's hard. It's hard to know how to actually figure out where you should be setting your goal, especially at a time where there's so much economic uncertainty and crisis in our communities. Like, we want to do as much as possible. So, take a deep breath first, look at your data, and then set a goal.
We're basing this on real numbers, not hopes, wishes, dreams, and then we can actually achieve them.
As always, if you want to see our lovely faces, you can watch this episode on YouTube. I hope you subscribe over there because we put a lot of effort into the video as well. But that's it for today. Go out there, get some good fundraising goals. And if this episode resonated with you, drop us a note. We'd love to hear from you. But that's it for today. Until next time, bye for now. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Small Nonprofit. If you want to continue the conversation, feel free to connect with our guests directly or find me on LinkedIn. Let's keep moving money to mission and prioritizing our well-being. Bye for now.